Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, Senior Documentary Programmer, AFI Festivals. Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have with us for this Q&A CJ Hunt, the director of The Neutral Ground, and the film's producer, Darcy McKinnon. Welcome, CJ and Darcy, and congratulations on the film.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. We're really thrilled to be here.
Great. So I just wanted to start off kind of at the beginning, in the, I think it's in the first full scene in the movie, you discuss how you were sitting in that hearing room in New Orleans back in 2015, and the idea occurred to you, what about making a documentary about this? But I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how the idea for the film got off the ground, and both of you feel free to jump in.
Great. Thanks. So as you maybe mentioned at the top, my background is in comedy and satire and comedy writing. So by 2015, I had been living in New Orleans for about 7 or 8 years. I had worked as a middle school teacher and an after-school teacher teaching comedy to kids and at the public defender's office. But basically that time was shifting more and more towards me trying to figure out how to write comedy. And I saw a lot of comedic potential to me in, a group of people who believe that moving statues across town is somehow the end of the world or somehow destroys our notion of history. To me, comedy is a way to bring out those contradictions of, that's strange, you weren't upset when the city of New Orleans was moving entire neighborhoods, and somehow the moving of a statue is the apocalypse. So I called my friend Darcy, who we knew was from teaching, and I was like, hey, I have an idea. I think this project would be pretty quick.
It wasn't. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Well, not a spoiler. You guys saw the movie.
Well, you just watched it.
It took 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, CJ and I met teaching middle school together, and I actually taught Louisiana history and taught the Civil War and Reconstruction. And like you said, after almost 10 years, we were both following our passions, and I was working in media and film. And so that's how we came together to start covering what we thought was going to be a quick short, a doc short, a YouTube short, kind of poking at the barrier between what people say is history and what they really mean. But it became a much longer effort on everybody's part, including the city of New Orleans.
And we start with
United States of America.
We start with that scene in the film because I want the audience to feel what we were feeling watching that there are moments in which the veil that sits over white supremacy slips off a little bit, and you can see people saying the thing out loud. So when you're in that meeting and you're seeing people saying, real oppression is when thugs are beating up tourists, or when you're seeing people get up and saying over and over again, the Civil War was not about slavery, it was about states' rights. And actually the first slave owners were Black. There's a level, the emotion for me of watching that is, that encapsulates the gaslighting that I think Black people in America feel all the time. Being told that, this white supremacy that we see in front of us is not real. And in fact, historically speaking, has never been real. And so the film started, I think, in an attempt to fight back against that gaslighting and being like, what are you talking about? Where does that story even come from? And do you realize how silly you sound?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us programmers were pretty much immediately hooked with that opening scene in that in the hearing, because it really lays out everything that you just said. I did want to ask you, this is your feature documentary debut. You are a comedian, and in many ways, what makes this film unique is this melding of comedic elements with traditional documentary storytelling. I'd love to hear more about your creative process, the writing, conceptualizing, and see, how you went about fusing the worlds of, say, stand-up comedy and documentary film. Not an easy task for your first film, by the way, CJ.
Yeah, Darcy will agree with you.
It wasn't easy.
I am drawn to comedy, even outside of film, because it's my coping mechanism for dealing with the absurd. So I think there are a few tools that can capture absurdity as well as comedy. And part of the thing about Race in America is it is full of absurdities of the things that will not change, refuse to recognize themselves. So that's when sad, terrible things are happening, just personally, my mind goes towards maybe trying to package it as how do I keep from crying or feeling like I'm going crazy about something. So that is always my first instinct. With this project, it was my first instinct. And I think that the journey of making the film was figuring out where comedy falls short, or where you need to just let something play without any sort of commentary, and also learning that the film is not television. So I'm excited that we are going to be on PBS, but my first year of making this film, I was also hired to work in late night television for the first time, and that's been my career since. And so many times coming down, and Darcy, was really key on helping me with this, but so many times coming down back to New Orleans to work on the film, in my mind, I'm trying to replicate the things that I'm learning how to do on working behind the camera in late night television. So I'm just doing some weird copy of some great correspondents who are in the field that the whole nation knows about. So Darcy was really helping me, being like, hey, you have to figure out your own thing, which is going to feel a lot less funny than if you were on TV, and is going to have to be honest and earnest in a way that you can't hide behind any sort of character. So that was the process for me, figuring out where jokes don't belong and figuring out how to feel okay feeling really unfunny for long periods of time, in situations that were uncomfortable.
Darcy, how was it for you to help CJ learn to be unfunny?
It's a really hard climb because he's so funny all the time.
Thank you everyone for joining us for the interview. It's over. Thank you.
We were in editorial for 3 years, and I think there are more versions of the film that will never be seen, and a lot of it is around that tension. I think CJ's a writer and a comedian, so his instinct is to write the conclusion, and so we had a lot of back and forth about like what part needs to live firmly in documentary, when are the times when something developing on screen is the funny, right, or is the poignant, or is the unique, and when are the moments when you can dive in with your commentary, and when are the moments when you need to let the cut breathe and let the story develop on its own. And then I think another thing that was really key in the development, CJ as a comedian started the film out being in the film, but as we started the process and developed it in partnership with some really great creative minds, and support, particularly Firelight Media, which is a supporter of the film, we got a lot of feedback of like, but why you? Why should you be in the film? And that was when we kind of started to emerge the storyline of CJ and his dad and CJ's own journey. And I think that was really difficult for CJ to be. It's like not just about being able to be funny, but about being able to be vulnerable on screen. And that's harder, I think, sometimes, especially when you're used to using, as CJ says, comedy to understand tragedy and the absurdities and the hypocrisies of racism.
Our editor Jane Geisler was also really instrumental in that too, of being like, what are you trying to do here in this scene, CJ? So, in the Charlottesville scene that, you all have seen, I do say I am terrified, but there's a moment that I'm walking along with them and, all the white supremacists are going, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I just turn into the camera and I'm like, these guys are really big fans of the Baja Man. And Jane is like, what are you doing there? And I'm like, oh, I thought I needed to make a joke that's really just for me to feel safe. And I think she was really good at being like, we don't need that here. Like, that may be your instinct to feel safe in the world, but we don't need that all the time.
Well, that's fascinating to hear that, because obviously we just see the finished film and don't know what's left out. And I think, for you to credit your editor and mention her contribution is really important here. So I'm glad you did that. And you both have great instincts, because my next two questions were about things that you just started to talk about. One is about the scenes with your dad, CJ, which are funny and poignant, and I think revelatory. And I wondered about, just your conversations with your dad prior to the start of filming about, hey, I'm making this film and I'm wondering if you could be in it, and just how you guys, as father and son, sort of came to an understanding about, having this dialogue on camera.
It wasn't a big ask, because it's basically just, that's his mode all the time. So the mode that you see him in, the things that he's talking about, the making of pancakes, the sort of depth of where how dark that conversation will go, that's just the vibe all the time in the house. So it wasn't hard to say, hey, can I bring a camera and can we just talk, and can you just make me breakfast and I'll just ask you some questions. It was true to our relationship. It wasn't like, hey, I would like to bring up this thing we've never talked about. I think the thing that was harder was admitting to him that I feel a lot of rage, and I feel that I'm angry all the time. And what was surprising was the pride that he took in that. You see him in the film. That's a very proud moment for him. And I think, yeah, that was just a surprise. And I normally would expect a parent to be like, what do you mean I made you angry? But I think he takes that as a badge of honor and a level of being alert to what the world looks like.
And I'm assuming he's seen the finished film at this point. And
yes.
What notes did he give you along the way, or about the finished film? We know he had something to say.
Okay, I mean, you all have seen the film, and he, after watching 82 minutes of this film, his main note was, Siege, I love it. Why didn't you show the pancakes? I was cooking pancakes in that scene. You cut them out, and can we put them back in? So that was his note, and it just shows that he and I look for different things in documentary storytelling.
But you did show the cutaway of the box.
I know, which only made him want me to show the pancakes more. So, I mean, it was not the editorial arguments that I thought that I was going to be having with my father about the film.
So I did want to jump ahead on a more serious note to the scene you talked about earlier, which is the march in Charlottesville and the events down there. That shot that you described when you and the photographer that you're there with, is it really just is kind of a just chilling scene for the audience, because it's not like there's a distance between you and the march. You're there, you're in it, but you're obviously apart from it. But we're a bit scared for you, and I just wonder if tell us a bit more about because there's a scene before in the hotel room where you're talking about the events that may transpire, but when did it really dawn on you, how horrific that was all going to be?
I want to jump in here and say that that scene is interesting to me, because Aziz Abdul, our friend and photographer, who's actually Louisiana Photographer of the Year this year, based on a lot of the work that he did around the same moment in history, it is a war photographer. So those are situations he's comfortable in. I, on the other hand, do not try to go into those situations. And you see that in the film, I think. So CJ in that moment, I think, is caught between me, who was like, when he decided to go to Charlottesville, being like, no, we're not doing that, no. and Aziz, who's very comfortable in those positions.
Also, you're seeing us getting what I think is going to be sort of like extra features or the end of the film, you know, that the monuments finished coming down in May in New Orleans, and us thinking that, okay, that's the end of the story. We can see a clear ending of the empty pedestal and the power of the people versus the system, and white supremacy is a thing that is fading away. And I think coming back from Charlottesville, it became really impossible to have that feel like the ending emotion, you know, that it's not just a turn for the film, that it was a turn for what I think about the world in terms of the growth of white supremacy and the clarity of what we're up against. So that was a big turning point for me and for the whole making of what the film is supposed to be showing. What is it that we are clarifying? Do we make films like this to say, get out of here, racists, they're dinosaurs and they're going away? Or are we making films like this to make the audience aware of just how much deeper it is, the work that we have to do besides, you know, pulling a green book and going out and changing hearts and minds. Yeah, and so I think in that scene, I don't know when it dawned on me. I mean, probably the first time that we were, I mean, the shot is in there of looking out at a field, a darkened field of all of these men with the torches. Because what I don't think necessarily comes through in the film is how excited and how proud they felt. That, you know, for those of us who have participated in marches over the past year, you know, against police brutality and for justice, you know, the feeling of collective power that you feel when you are marching through the street. You know what it feels like to be like, whose streets, you know? But to be in the presence of white supremacists who are not a tiny smattering or a fringe, and to feel how powerful that they feel and how they feel that this place is their own and they are marching through UVA campus. I think that is what stays with me. Not just, ooh, those torches, ooh, wow, but like, that is what it looks like when that segment of society feels that they are in power.
You mentioned the marches that happened after the murder of George Floyd, and because, you know, your editing process continued and your filmmaking process continued, obviously, you know, the events of May 2020 occur, and you do end up including them in the film, you know, at the end of the film in the form of a montage. And can you tell us a bit about how those events changed the film and you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was important to, every time we thought that the film was done, the world was shifting in some way that made it impossible to end the film there. So we were in the stages to wrap the film and talking about our final edits when George Floyd was murdered. And for me, it was a couple of things. One, you know, the really unexpected thing was how many monuments started coming down. And, you know, Darcy and I have spent 5-6 years making a film about a monument removal that went through the official channels. And it was 511 days between when the city used its democratic process to say these monuments are going, and when they were finally able to overcome the sort of vigilante and legal white resistance that kept those monuments in place. So 511 days of waiting for permission to do the thing you already decided that you need to do as a city. So that stands in such stark contrast to the summer of 2020, when people realized we don't need to petition city council. We don't need to pass an ordinance. We don't need to wait to bring these monuments down. That was important to capture, because I think that is a change in the world. I think that's a change in the country of the monuments that came down over that summer, so many of those were cities taking down their own monuments because they understood that if they did not do something, that those monuments to white supremacy would not stand uncontested in public space. And I do think that that was a major shift that we needed to capture on film. And then the larger thing that I wanted us to be able to capture is, what is the nation's response to white supremacy when you can see it with your own eyes? That is the argument of the film. That is the question we are asking across time. Do you see it now that we show you that white supremacy, the words were inscribed on the monument? No. Do you see it now that we show you the documents where they're talking explicitly about slavery? No. And I think the question of 2020 and the thing that people were saying out in the streets was, do you see it now? Can you see it now? And if you are choosing not to see it now, what does that mean? And I think that is the question that we're trying to leave the audience with.
One of the activists who is part of Taking Down NOLA and who is a teacher, shout out to teachers and librarians, says throughout the process and in our film, we have to make the connection between symbols and systems. And I think what last summer did was, I think for the film itself, you know, there's always a risk when we talk about a monument film, that we're just in the realm of symbols, right? That what does it mean when you take if we take down all the statues and we change all the school names and we change all the street names, we have changed the symbols. How does that connect back to the systems? And I think that last summer was a moment when the connection between symbols and systems became really clear. So that's why it was such a key moment in the film and why it had to be included.
We had previous scenes trying to help make that connection, but nothing makes the connection stronger than millions of people in the streets demanding justice and gathering around statues of slave owners, that, hey, there are multiple ways that white supremacy has fixed itself in stone in our reality and pretends that it is neutral and pretends that it is invisible. And eventually people are saying, we see it, it is not invisible, and it needs to move.
Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. We could definitely continue this conversation for another hour easily. I can see how you did the 4-hour version for POV of an interview, but I did want to, I know you have an impact campaign connected to the film. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that and what we can expect to see.
CJ and I met on the 3rd floor of Samuel J. Green Charter School in New Orleans, Louisiana, as middle school teachers. And so I think that really frames our approach to how we envision impact. And in the film, you know, I think there's a teacherly quality to the idea that we're going to dust off the primary sources and improve and make a complete argument around how the origin of these statues relates to their removal today and make the connections. And so we are building a campaign around the film that is explicitly connected to education and educators, and it talks about the way we teach Reconstruction and Civil War history in America's public schools, that provides materials and resources to teachers and schools and school leaders to help improve their ability to connect with students on these issues. One of the points that the film makes is the ways that it was an intentional re-narrativizing of the Civil War by the United Daughters of the Confederacy through textbook committees. So there is work that is to be done in how we understand what we have called history since the Civil War. I think we also have an interest in looking at, there's right now in state legislatures around the country, a pushback against critical race theory, or we just had a
shout out to critical race theory.
Yeah, we just had a law that was proposed in Louisiana that said that you couldn't ever teach that Louisiana had been racist or sexist ever in its history. These are things that are coming through right now. We just saw that scholar Nicole Hannah-Jones was denied tenure by UNC by the same board of trustees that have been trying to stop the renaming of buildings on their campus, symbols to systems. So I think for us as former teachers and as people who get really excited about this research, for the long-term impacts is education. How do we provide the receipts? How do we help people consult the documents? And how do we take the narratives of history that you're taught starting in elementary school and make sure that they're accurate to the lived experiences that have impacts today?
And luckily we had, we know that it works, that so many people, this film is partly made because so many people say the Civil War was not about slavery. And that is specifically a product of a group choosing to work in schools to change what is in textbooks. How do we undo that work? That's what we're asking in our impact campaign.
I'm so glad to hear that. As a former high school teacher myself,
Hey, shout out to teachers.
Hey,
I know that many teachers will love to get their hands on whatever resources you put together in relation to, in association with this film. And the film itself will be a tremendous teaching tool. It's also incredibly engaging and entertaining and important. And I want to congratulate you both again on the film, and thank you for being here with us to talk about it today.
Thanks so much, Ken.
thanks for having us.
And I just want to let the audience know, please do tell all your friends that this film is screening until the end of the festival. And we'd love to hear from you on social media at #AFIDOCS. And of course, you can check out our full lineup and virtual events at docs.afi.com. Bye, everyone.